Somewhere in the atmosphere right now, a switch is being flipped that most people have absolutely no idea is coming. And within the next several days, it's going to change the air outside your door in a way you'll feel the moment you step outside one morning. For weeks, a huge chunk of the country has been trapped under a dome of punishing heat, the kind that doesn't let up even after the sun goes down, and millions of people have simply accepted it as the new normal for the rest of summer. But that normal is about to break. A massive cool down is building. It's real, and I'm going to walk you through exactly how far it reaches, who gets it first, and who gets left behind sweating in a heat bubble while everyone around them finally gets relief. If you like knowing what's coming before it actually arrives, go ahead and subscribe now so you don't get caught off guard, because this pattern is shifting fast, and the details matter more than usual this year. Here's the honest picture, and it's a split screen. On one side, a genuine, substantial cool down is spilling down from the north, dragging temperatures lower and lower as we push toward the end of August and roll into September. On the other side, there's a stubborn, brutal core of heat that is not going anywhere quietly. And if you happen to live inside that zone, you're going to be watching the rest of the country cool off while you're still cooking. Both of these things are happening at the same time in the same country, and that contrast is exactly what makes this stretch of weather so interesting. So let's break it down piece by piece, because by the end of this, you're going to understand not just what's happening this week, but the bigger machine driving all of it, and why this particular autumn and winter might turn out to be something special. Let's start with the cool down, because that's the part a lot of people have been desperate for. As we move through the first half of this week, cooler air is going to work its way in across the central part of the country, the north central states, the Midwest, the Great Lakes, and the interior Northeast. Now, I want to be straight with you about something, because a lot of channels oversell this. This first wave is not a single clean drop into fall. The cool air comes in, and then the heat pushes B. Back and reinforces itself the very next day. It's a back and forth. So even in the regions that are getting the relief, you're going to bounce around in the 60s, the 70s, and even some low 80s, depending on the day. It's a taste, not the main course, but it's a real taste. And after this summer, a lot of you have said even a taste feels like a gift. The main course comes later. As we head into this coming weekend and slide into next week, that's when a more meaningful cooler anomaly starts to set up, and it holds on into the following weekend to O. This is the piece that starts to feel like a genuine change, rather than a brief break. And here's the thing that makes it even better. Beyond just the temperature drop, this incoming air is also going to scrub a lot of the moisture out of this atmosphere. The dew points fall, the humidity drops away, and suddenly the air doesn't feel thick and heavy anymore. Anyone who's lived through a swampy summer knows the humidity is half the misery. Take that away, and even a warm afternoon feels 100 times more comfortable. So it's not just cooler numbers on the thermometer, it's a completely different feel to the air itself. Now let me show you the engine underneath all of this, because once you understand the driver, everything else clicks into place. There's a pattern that meteorologists track called the Pacific North American pattern, and depending on whether it's leaning positive or negative, it flips the entire setup of the country. Right now, we're locked in a negative phase, and what that does is dig a trough across the western United States while building a ridge, a big dome of heat, across Tale Stad, the central and eastern parts of the country. That ridge is the reason so many of you have been baking. It parks the heat right over you and refuses to move until something deeper comes along to break it down. When the pattern flips toward positive, you get the mirror image. Warmth building out west, while a trough of cooler air and storms sweeps through the central and eastern states. That flip is what we're inching toward, and it's what unloads the real cool down. But here's where I have to be honest with you. This is the part that separates a forecast from a fantasy. The way this trough is actually shaping up, it's not going to dive as far south as some people are hoping. The high pressure, that Hiet Dome, is going to dig in and hold its ground across the south-central part of the country. So if you live down there, Texas, Louisiana, the deep south, I've got some bad news for you. You're going to hold D onto your heat the longest, unfortunately, while folks to the north and east of you are pulling out sweatshirts. It's not fair, but it's what the data is showing, and I'd rather tell you the truth than sell you a cool down that isn't coming to your backyard. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, because I genuinely want to see how this splits across the country, and whether you're on the lucky side of that line or the one still stuck in the oven. Let me put some structure on the timing so you can actually plan around this. That first cool front pushes through roughly the 20th through the 23rd. It brings relief to the north, but at the same time it keeps funneling serious heat into the southern half of the country and along the Gulf, meaning dangerous heat index values, the feels like numbers that really matter for your body. Right after that, front passes, the pattern relaxes just enough for the heat to sneak back in. Not as vicious as before, but enough that you'll notice it before the next front arrives. Then comes a second front, aimed at the end of August, rolling into September, and this one is the stronger of the two. It reaches further south, it strips away more heat, and it's the one that starts to feel like a real turning point rather than a temporary dip. If you look at the lower level temperature data, as we head through Monday, Tuesday, and into Wednesday, you can watch the cooler air spill into the Midway, St., the Great Lakes, and out through the Northeast. By Thursday, the coolest pocket is sitting right over the Ohio Valley and stretching out toward the Northeast. But remember, the heat keeps reinforcing itself day after day right up until that point. It's a tug of war. Then, this weekend into next week, the picture sharpens. You can clearly see the western heat building while a cool front pushes through the central and eastern states. And then yet another front rolls in for the following weekend. That later front is the one really dragging cooler temperatures further south, and it's also the one wringing the humidity out of the air. To put actual numbers on it, as we go toward Monday into Tuesday, parts of the Ohio Valley and the Northeast could run anywhere from 10 to 15 degrees below average. And that below average air hangs around through Thursday into Friday. That's a genuine, noticeable cool down. The kind where you might crack a window at night instead of running the air conditioner. And the models are in strong agreement on this, which matters. When the American model and the European model line up on the same solution, your confidence in the forecast goes way up. And right now, they're telling a very similar story. Now here's a bigger picture thread I want to pull on, because it explains why this whole pattern is behaving the way it is, and why this year in particular is different. There's a super El Nino intensifying in the Pacific right now, one of the strongest in decades, and it's already starting to reshape the jet stream. That's not a small detail. El Nino acts like a massive lever on the atmosphere, strengthening the subtropical jet, changing where storms track, and generally reorganizing the flow of air across North America. The increasing Pacific forcing is exactly what's beginning to drive these pattern shifts, and it's a big reason the signals are pointing toward an active, potentially robust upcoming fall and winter. If you've been wondering why the atmosphere feels like it's shifting gears earlier than usual this year, this is a huge part of the answer. Comment below if you want me to do a full deep dive breakdown on what this super El Nino means for the winter ahead, because there's a lot to unpack and I don't want to rush it here. There's another oscillation worth watching too, the Arctic oscillation. Right now, there's a pocket of cooler air riding along with these incoming fronts that shows up in that signal. That's part of what's helping deliver these cool shots down in, the country. All of these patterns, the Pacific North American pattern, the Arctic oscillation, the El Nino forcing, they're all gears in the same machine, and when they start turning together, that's when you get meaningful sustained change rather than a random cool day here and there. Now let's talk about the other side of the split screen, because I promised you the full truth, not just the pleasant half. For a large chunk of the southern United States, this week is going to be relentless. Not just hot, but extreme. And there's an import-ant difference between those two words in the world of forecasting. When meteorologists flag major heat risk, that's serious. But when they escalate it to extreme, that specifically means you're not getting meaningful relief overnight. The temperatures stay dangerously elevated even after dark. And that's when heat becomes genuinely life-threatening, because the human body relies on those cooler nighttime hours to recover. Without that recovery window, the danger compounds day after day. If you look at the heat risk maps, the red zones mark major risk, but it's the purple zones you really want to pay attention to, because purple is extreme, and purple is where there's almost no overnight relief. As we go through this, that extreme zone builds from the south and expands toward the southeast, and it doesn't just show up for a day and leave, and it's there Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. While cooler fronts are sweeping relief into the northern half of the country, the southern half of the lower 48 is just going to cook. The extreme heat risk has actually expanded out toward the 23rd and 24th, maybe even the 25th. And this is directly because that high-pressure ridge digs in and stays parked over the south-central region. Everyone else gets the cool front. You get a heat bubble. No AA has been clear that extreme heat is likely across much of the southern United States through late August, with heat index values running from 105 to 110 degrees and beyond. And here's where it gets even more concerning, because the heat isn't the only threat down there. Layered right on top of that extreme heat is a rapid onset drought risk, and that footprint has grown significantly. We're talking about Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, Missouri, and Kansas, with Oklahoma in the mix as well. Drought has genuinely reemerged across parts of deep South Texas and the Rio Grande Valley, and where drought already exists, this pattern threatens to make it worse. When you combine extreme heat with rapidly developing drought, you get a dangerous feedback loop. The dry ground can't cool itself, which allows the air above it to heat even more efficiently, which dries the ground out further. It feeds on itself. Even as some of the sharpest heat warnings get downgraded slightly during the transition, a strong, moderate risk lingers around the southern half of the country, all the way toward the 26th and 2. 7th, right while the northern states are enjoying their fronts. So the split screen isn't just cool versus warm, it's comfortable versus genuinely hazardous, and it's happening simultaneously. Let me shift to something a lot of you are watching closely as we transition from August into September, and that's the tropics. This is where I have to correct a piece of conventional thinking, because the reality this year is a little different from what you might expect. As we move deeper into the season, storms typically get eared by the position of that high pressure curving along its edges, and that steering is exactly what we'll be watching. As we head toward the 24th and 25th, right as this pattern change kicks in, model guidance has hinted at a tropical wave moving near the Lesser Antilles, and you can watch how it interacts with that larger, cold front pushing through at the end of the month. When guidance runs the numbers on whether a tropical system could organize, it shows some strengthening potential toward the 24th of August before the pattern tries to curve it out into the open Atlantic. That's a setup where it could easily fizzle into nothing, but it's also the kind of environment where, given the right pocket of favorable conditions, something could spin up. But here's the crucial context, and this is the part I want you to hold on to. That same Super El Nino that's driving the beautiful cooldown pattern is also acting as a lid on the Atlantic hurricane season. El Nino typically cranks up wind shear across the Atlantic, and wind shear tiers developing storms apart before they can organize. That's precisely why NOAA is predicting a below no. RML Atlantic hurricane season this year, calling for around 8 to 14 named storms, with only 3 to 6 becoming hurricanes. So far, the season has been notably quiet, having produced just a couple of named storms. The peak months of August and September could turn out much calmer than a typical year in terms of Atlantic development. When you look at the atmospheric setup, the velocity potential where the lift is favorable, you can see a lot of that rising motion getting shunted over into the Pacific because of that strong El Nino, which is another fingerprint of the same pattern. That doesn't mean the Atlantic goes completely silent. There may be brief windows around the very start of septing. Hember, where a favorable pocket passes through and allows something to develop, especially as dry, dusty air over the Atlantic starts to retreat. But the overall message is a suppressed Atlantic, and that's a direct consequence of the exact same climate driver reshaping your temperatures. It all connects. Now let's get to the numbers you actually want. The temperatures you can expect, region by region. Through the first half of this week, cooler air keeps filtering in from the northwest, sliding through the north-central states, the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, and out into the northeast, bringing those refreshing 60s. Meanwhile, the south-central region holds steady in the 80s on the low end and much higher elsewhere, and the European model is in strong agreement on this picture. For the daytime highs in that first half of the week, we're still looking at temperatures climbing over 100 and even up toward 110 degrees across the southwest, the central and south-central regions, and into the southeast. In the Nordhorn half, it warms right back up between the cool shots, which is that daily reinforcement of heat I keep mentioning. The feels-like temperatures, the heat indices, stay dangerously hot across the central, southern, and southeastern parts of the country through the first half of the week. Then the second half of the week is when it really steps down across the central states, the Midwest, the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, and out through the Northeast. Now we're introducing the chance for 50s, and again, the European model basiques this up. As the pattern change takes hold, that high ridge builds toward the west and also across the south. So while the Great Lakes and Northeast finally sink into comfortable cool air, the Southeast keeps its heat indices elevated and uncomfortable. So even within the same week, the country is pulling apart into two very different worlds. As we push toward the end of August, this is where it gets dramatic in the best way for the north. We start seeing 40s and 50s working through the northwest, and cooler 50s and 60s spilling across the Midwest, the Great Lakes, and the Northeast. The daytime highs in those regions settle into the 60s and 70s, which after this summer is going to feel like a completely different season arriving early. But the flip side remains harsh because a lot of people across the south and southeast are still stuck above 100 degrees. Then, as we step into the beginning of September, look at what the pattern delivers. An even deeper cool push, bringing 50s, 40s, and 60s with the ridging saint, hill visible across the southeast, stretching toward the northwest. That ridging is why the south clings to its warmth while everyone else transitions. Even the daytime highs in the northern tier drop into the 60s. The pattern data is verifying. The machine is turning, and the big cool front is doing exactly what the signals promised. Let me address something before we finish, because there's real weather happening right now, not just in the forecast. There have been significant power outages across the country, hundreds of thousands of customers affected, including a large number in Hawaii from a tropical system passing by. along with tens of thousands in the Ohio and Indiana region. Storms are firing today across Ohio, and additional activity is moving from the mid-Atlantic toward the northeast. As a storm system digs in and drags some troughing down toward Canada, it's going to spark severe weather across the Midwest and north central states as we move from Monday into Tuesday, likely lingering into Wednesday and possibly reaching the northeast by Thursday. So severe weather returns for a few days, and it's happening right alongside that ridge building toward the west as part of the larger pattern change. That heat ridge stretches across the south central region and even nudges toward the southeast for a moment before the cool front finally pushes down. So you'll enjoy that front this weekend, but there's some active, potentially dangerous weather to get through first. For today's severe threat specifically, there's a low-end tornado risk in play, roughly a couple percent, but the primary hazards are damaging wind and hail. Wind gusts around 50 mph are possible in the elevated risk areas, and hail up to an inch is on the table. When you cross-reference the tornado outlook with Aditio, in all guidance, there's a signal that the threat could ramp up around northern Virginia through Maryland and Pennsylvania. As the evening unfolds, storms rolling out of Indiana and Michigan look to congeal over Ohio in the early afternoon, while a separate cluster tracks across the northeast. By mid to late afternoon, the wind. Threat increases as storms sweep through Pennsylvania and Maryland, and there's a chance of some supercell structures over western Pennsylvania into Maryland before the whole thing lines out into a more widespread wind threat. Because of that, the tornado risk could stretch into western Pennsylvania around 5 or 6 in the evening. Later tonight, additional storms may develop across central and northern Missouri into Illinois, carrying a strong wind threat of their own. Tomorrow, the action circles back to the central and north central plains, mainly focused on Nebraska to western Iowa. It's a lower-end threat, but a tornado risk still exists there, while scattered storms pepper the rest of the country. Around 7 in the evening, storms firing from Missouri into Illinois could pack a punch. And high-resolution guidance actually raises the wind threat there significantly, showing potential for gusts of 50, 60, and even 70 mph cutting through Illinois from Missouri. Southern Ohio into West Virginia could see 50 mph gusts as well. And there's a wind threat out toward eastern Idaho, western Montana, western Wyoming, and eastern Colorado as everything wraps around that upper level high. So for tomorrow, there's a tornado threat centered on Nebraska, bleeding into a piece of South Dakota, though the dominant hazard remains wind, and that wind story continues into Tuesday. Tuesday brings both a marginal and a slight risk, with damaging wind and hail as the main concerns across the central plains into the mid-Mississippi Valley during the afternoon and evening. The rapid refresh guidance is already flagging a lot of storm development, especially over Iowa, where a substantial wind threat is CI. Tia's up. You can see a Boeing line feature developing Tuesday evening, sliding from South Dakota into Iowa and southern Wisconsin, strongest over Iowa and Illinois. Additional guidance suggests that Central Plains threat could get upgraded around Nebraska, with a separate risk showing up across the southeast. And this unsettled setup looks to linger into Wednesday and Thursday as well. So the same days the country is transitioning toward that beautiful cooldown, the atmosphere is throwing some punches on the way out. That's often how these big pattern changes work. The old regime doesn't leave quietly, so let's bring it all together, because you've now got the full picture, and it's genuinely a tale of two Americas over these next couple of weeks. For the northern half of the country, the Midwest, the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, and the Northeast, real relief is on the way, arriving in waves that get progressively stronger, with the biggest and most satisfying cool-down landing at the end of August and building into September, complete with lower humidity that makes the air feel like a different season entirely. For the southern half, especially Texas, Louisiana, and the Deep South, the heat digs in and holds, with extreme overnight conditions and a growing drought threat that deserves to be taken seriously. Underneath all of it, a super El Niño is reshaping the jet stream driving these pattern flips, suppressing the Atlantic hurricane season, and hinting at an active and robust fall and winter ahead. Every piece of this connects to that single powerful driver in the Pacific, which is exactly why this year feels different from a typical late summer. The most important thing I can leave you with is this. The relief is coming from most of the country. It's real, and the models are confident. But the timing and the reach depend entirely on where you live, and the split between the cool north and the cooking south is going to be sharp, and unusually stubborn this time around. So don't assume the cool down you're hearing about is automatically headed for your backyard. Check where that dividing line sits, because this year it's holding firmer than usual, and keep one eye on that El Niño, because what it's doing to the atmosphere right now is just the opening act for what could be a memorable winter. That's the full breakdown of where this pattern is taking us. If this helped you understand not just what's coming, but why it's coming, do me a quick favor and hit that like button. And if you want to stay ahead of every twist this atmosphere throws at us through fall and into what's shaping up to be a big winter, subscribe to F for Forecast so you never get caught off guard. And I really do want to hear from you in the comments. Are you on the lucky side of this pattern, finally getting your cooldown? Or are you stuck in that southern heat bubble watching everyone else cool off? Let me know where you're watching from and what you're actually feeling outside, because the story of a pattern like this is written region by region, and yours is part of it. I'll keep you updated every step of the way. Take care, stay safe out there, and get ready for the change, because it's coming.